Welcome to episode 38 of the Empowering Ability Podcast.
Welcome to the Empowering Ability Podcast, where we get you and your loved ones impacted by disability the information needed to live a full and meaningful life. Now here's your host, Eric Gall.
Hey folks, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining today. Excited to bring you this interesting episode with Dr. Annick Janson. And Dr. Annick Janson's from New Zealand and really has some global experience throughout her career. She's a mother to 3 children, as she'll tell you in the podcast, and her youngest son has a disability. And she's also a clinical psychologist, so she understands both the family and professional sides very well from her own personal experience. And Dr. Annick Janson has taken the time to really deeply think and investigate and test and prototype, rethinking the experience that young families that have a son or a daughter with developmental disability really go through, and what those first experiences look like, first contact with professionals, and really working towards giving families agency and empowering families. So I'm really excited to bring you this conversation with Dr. Annick Janson and the innovative approach that she has designed along with some others that she collaborates with, and to share these ideas with you. And maybe there's an opportunity for you to reach out and to connect with Annick to talk about these ideas and if they might make sense for you and your family, or for you as a service provider, and to maybe bring those to your area of the world. And I know Annick would love that. So excited to bring you this conversation with Annick. Here she is. Hi, Dr. Annick Janson. Welcome to the Empowering Ability Podcast.
Hi from down under.
Excited to have you on the show today, Annick. And maybe we could just start off by giving you the opportunity to tell the listeners a little bit about who you are and your story.
Thank you for this opportunity. I'm equally excited. So, the first thing that people notice about me is my funny accent. So even though I live in New Zealand now, I was born in France and travel a little bit around the world for my studies when I trained as a clinical psychologist. So I guess I won't lose that accent ever. So I have to disclose that right up front. In terms of my personal journey, I am married to my sweetheart, almost youngest from our. We met when we were 19, and we've together created a great life with our 3 children. So I have 2 boys and a daughter. And Melissa, my daughter, who was interviewed on your podcast, I guess as a sibling and a psychologist with her career at the moment. And so I have, with the 3 children, each child brings their own amazing world and their joys and the specific lessons that they teach us. When you have children who are sort of mainstream, you maybe think less about these things. When our 3rd child and son came into our family, and when we were told that he is on the spectrum, life changed quite a bit. And so we at first followed advice given by professionals until there was a turning point. Actually, looking forward to being to the podcast today, I was thinking, what was a turning point for us with bringing, so his name is Yaniv, bringing Yaniv up. And the turning point was when one day I was quite disheartened by the attempts of professionals and teachers to try and make him fit into the mainstream or the quote-unquote normal boxes and paths. And I realized that he had different approaches, different point of view, and that there was a lot actually that he was teaching me that I didn't know before. But I decided, well, we're going to skip the normal stage. We're going directly for the unusual genius state. Life proved me wrong, whether it was a self-fulfilling prophecy or what, I don't know. But when he was 16, we realized that he was an amazing artist. And that came as a total shock to us because he never did any art at home, even though we tried to give him colors, pencils, etc. No one was not interested. But in high school, he was interested and worked really hard to prove himself. And part of that was because he needed less of a teacher aid in the art class than he did with other things, because the more academic subjects were more difficult for him, and when things became more abstract, he really became disruptive. So we were heading towards quite a negative academic path and academic experience for him, so that when he was showing his actions that he was a good artist, we didn't know at the time that it was going to develop into an international career, but at least it was something to hold on and say, well, let's just go with his strength. And from that moment on, with something I call the eye of the needle, when I was trying to explain to teachers and professionals, I said, if art is what interests him, everything that we want to do for school is going to go through art. So we weren't going to teach him word processing program called, so and so, and then with it you can write documents. We're going to say, oh, an artist needs to have something called a bio, a curriculum vitae. We use those to teach. And the way that you write it is by pushing on this button on the computer and start writing. So everything was through his interest and his motivation to succeed. And, we were proving right. Today, he's an international artist, very proud to say. And even though we got a lot of help from the disability sector, so there's a great initiative in New Zealand called the Enabling Good Lives. And through it, we receive individualized funding and help with a coordinator that thinks together with us how to best use this funding to help him succeed in what he wants to do. He's got a plan. So, shout out to Enabling Good Lives in New Zealand, because it's a great initiative. And we have set him, I feel, on a great path. And, the future will tell. His website is yanivjanson.com, YANIVJANSON.com. And he's a great role model. And we're told that he's inspiring to other people. So we've just come back from a conference in Montenegro where him and I presented together with two professionals about his journey and his story. And it was very emotional moment, and people were very, very interested in the crowd, because it's one thing to say, this is what we need to do as a policy, this is what we need to do as training, but, the best thing is to see proof on the ground that these ideas and hypotheses and strategies work. Mm-hmm. So that's me as a mom and as a professional, as a clinical psychologist. To begin with, I followed, more or less the traditional pathway, which I'll talk to in a moment, with often a lack of satisfaction as to the outcomes we were getting. And luckily, I found a way to expand onto my professional knowledge into the area that we're going to discuss just now. Through 4 years ago, I met Sylvana Mahmic, who is the CEO of an organization in Sydney, in New South Wales, called Plum Tree. That's a service provider to the early intervention sector, the disability sector. And this organization literally sees hundreds, I think it's like 600-700 a year, of families with young children who have a disability or a developmental delay. And we were absolutely lucky and thrilled to be able to try out some new ideas. Basically, what we said, both Sylvana and I have a young adult, they're in their early 20s with a disability, and both of us were professionals. So we had the benefit of hindsight and of our professional training in thinking, if we had to scrap everything we know, redesign everything from the ground up. What would be the best intervention, the best course of action that we could offer families who have a young child with a disability, or serious doubts or diagnosis, or worries or concern that something is not following the normative path? What can we offer to them that would make a serious difference? Now, we didn't want a flash in the pan. We didn't want something that would have a local impact. We went straight for long-term, radical, new experience of the disability sector.
Mm-hmm.
So we designed the program.
Yeah, and I love that. And it's so you stopped and you said, well, I don't know if you questioned is what we have today working, and with your professional and personal family experience, taking that and looking at it from a blank canvas perspective and saying, okay, we're going to use a design thinking process to design the best experience for a young family with developmental or with a child with a developmental disability or developmental delay. I love that.
I was lucky enough to have Tim Brown from IDEO. I came to New Zealand, like, I don't know, about 10 years ago. I was really lucky to be the audience at that time, and even, was charged with writing a report about the impact of this, his presentation. And I was like rapt, because the cycle that you go through is very, very helpful and very different to sort of doing armchair research about is what's working, what's not working, how can we make things more with more impact, with more results. So this is wasn't an armchair research. Tim actually described what kind of ethnographic research you do on the ground and how you learn from it and how you include those elements into what he calls rapid prototyping.
Mm-hmm.
And it's exactly what we did. I've just looked the other day at how many prototypes we've made of our resources, and they really accumulate. And it's really great to see, to look back and see, we were thinking one way in the beginning, but then with the amazing input of parents, parents have skin in the game, in the well-being and the outcomes of their children. So that really differentiates us from professionals only. So it's been an incredible journey, and it's just getting better and better.
Mm-hmm. So you've redesigned that family, the experience that a family would go through when starting to interact with those professionals and service providers. So you come up with the program Now and Next. So maybe we could start with, what is Now and Next?
Great. So Now and Next is a learning program for parents that is radically different to any other programs. It's not a parenting program. It's not a support group. It's a program that starts on the premises that we are starting there. Parents are overwhelmed. We recognize this, and we want to give them the best opportunity to understand how they can move forward and how they can use their learning to build on success and get better and better results for their children. So that program, we prototyped it. At the beginning, it was like something like 18 individual session, one-on-one with parents. But basically, throughout our learning journey, we brought it down to 9 session, 8 group session and 1 individual session. And so it's a program that creates that shifts the mindset of parents to understanding the power of their own agency, the control that they do have over the well-being and the positive outcome for their children. So having shifted this mindset, we then need to bring professionals along with us, and that's the journey.
Mm-hmm. And
Now Next.
Yeah, I love that. And why a learning program?
Well, I'm a clinical psychologist, but I never actually quite gelled with the fact that people were offered therapy. take into account that there are people who need mental health help, for their own, specific purposes. That, yes, of course, but to group the whole field of disability sector into into a group of people that need the help of psychologists to move forward with their children. No, I think that's actually not the right way to go, because people are overwhelmed. They start from a overwhelm, and if you look at it strictly from the lens of psychology, you could say, "Oh, that's grief." And worse, what I've heard is when people were saying, "No, I'm not under grief. Actually, I would like to find solutions," and then those same professionals come back and say, "Oh, you're in denial." I mean, that is really not on. So when families want to engage in a program that we call a learning program, you say, "Come learn with us. We are going to work out together strategies and solutions to go forward and to get better results, get the results that you want, that are meaningful to you, and let's learn how to do it." That seems to me a much better framework than a therapeutic framework. Therapeutic framework are not necessarily focusing on what have I learned, what can I change. So I'm not sure that now it's very, very complex. There's literally hundreds types of therapies. So I don't want to make a sweeping generalization. Let's just say that when we talk to people about their learning and how they or getting more information from their peers, because that was a thing that people used to say very clearly. Parents and families absolutely love the interaction with other parents because they share what I call in my jargon, and I'm going to explain what it is, tacit knowledge. So tacit knowledge, as opposed to explicit knowledge, which is a knowledge that's out there in books. Tacit knowledge is knowledge that's tried and tested. And it's not necessarily things that I think about every day, but when I start talking about people about solving issues, then I can bring in what I've learned as a result of my interacting with people, with professionals, with other, with teachers, etc. So parents love sharing this knowledge. And basically, that's one of the things that we said, wow, we recognized as soon as we started trialing the Now and Next sessions on the ground, we realized that people absolutely enjoyed and got so much out of interaction with each other that we made sure that there was always a few modules, like a few sessions, small, small interaction within each of the Now and Next session, so that we get a chance to talk things out, and especially if it was something that we framed as, what are we talking about? We're talking about how do we get better results? How do we work on specific goals with our children? And so people could, if you're on your own and you learn something, there's a lot of trial and error involved. But if you're in a group and you hear from each other, you can literally save a lot of time, because you don't have to make other people's errors. You can just start on level 3 rather than ground level. So as we were piloting the bits of the Now Next program, we realized that there were some core elements that we had to keep for the final version.
Mm-hmm. And I really love how you've explained and you've talked to this mindset shift that you help parents with. And you shared that often you're hearing from parents that they feel overwhelmed. And from a clinical psychology perspective, that's looking at, this person's going through grief, or there's something wrong with them, or something like that. Whereas you've reframed it, or you've taken that mindset shift and, okay, well, there's nothing really wrong with the these families. There's a unique situation that they're in, and what are the tools and that we can give them, and how do we teach them these tools, and how do we give them the learning that they need so that they can be successful and flourish in their lives. So I love that shift from really, so there's something wrong with them, or which creates more of a victim mindset, versus and having them shift into, okay, here's the knowledge and the tools that you need, and let's work on creating that life that you really want for your family.
Yeah, and we have a research program that accompanies everything that we do, because as far as I'm concerned, everything has to be researched, otherwise it's just a good story. And so we can actually measure people empowerment level. And we were fortunate enough to be able to capture in discussion. This is not something that you can actually do in a questionnaire, because it's really hard for people to understand how to relate to the question. How did you feel before and how did you feel after?
Mm-hmm.
But when we measured the level of what we call the agency, which is the level of control that I feel that I have over my child's future and my child's accomplishment, there's a significant difference, a difference that is statistically significant between their empowerment before and after the group. So the level of agency that they feel that they can make a difference for their family.
Yeah.
And that's, if I have to decide what side of the fence I want to be in, I want to be on that side, because, you make mistakes all the time. Everybody makes mistakes, not just in the disability sector. So, what happens once you make mistakes? Do you recoil and think, oh, I'm just no good and I'm never going to be good at that, which is very often what, with the traditional approach, unfortunately, we get often in these situations like this. This is what I've, experienced as a professional,
Mm-hmm.
where in a learning situation, there are no mistakes. Everything is learning. So I'm just going to quote one of our facilitator, Melo Kelem Karidis, who says, there's no mistakes. It's just information. So if things don't pan out the way you want, and, go back, look at it, understand what you did that was helpful or not helpful, and then change the course of it. So you just keep on moving always towards the vision that you have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great quote. It reminds me of a quote from, I forget the person that said the quote, but it comes out of the Stanford Design School, and it's failure is the raw material of success.
Great.
Right.
Well, I like that too.
Along the same lines as that, and that's the design thinking approach as well. So maybe, Annick, we could start to talk about some of the key components of the program that helps to increase agency or helps to empower families that go through the learning process.
Yeah, so in order to explain better, I'm going to explain a traditional model versus what we do, simply because it's more helpful to see this is a program that already was a finalist in an innovation, the New South Wales Disability Sector Innovation, and won an innovation award, an excellence award, prior to that for the ECIA, New South Wales, or Early Childhood Intervention. So we're, it is very, very, very innovative and very new. But in order to understand, in order to show what's different, then I'm just going to use the before and after paradigm, if you don't mind. So
yeah, great.
Starting with number one, the very first difference is the initial interview. So in a traditional model, you have a professional sitting across a table with a parent or the family and saying, please, we're going to engage in this course of therapy or work together. Tell me about your family. Tell me about your child. Now, as a mother, I was always profoundly stressed, disturbed by this kind of situation. It didn't matter how much I prepared before. It's kind of a situation that puts you on the spot, also because it's really hard to come up with strength of your child, and you don't want to, but eventually you end up by saying, well, he can't do this, he can't do that. And at the end of an initial situation, an initial interview, you have to think, what does it leave parents with? And without exception, when I asked parents, they said, well, I felt terrible after that. Now, I'm not going to blame the sector for that, because we haven't, until now, we didn't have perhaps a better way. So people said, well, I have to go through it. And, we have to collect information to start. So that's probably why parents never really complained but now the research is starting to come up that when people have what is called IFSP, Individual Family Service Plan, that these face-to-face discussion around the table are actually not very good, but sometimes quite detrimental.
As you describe it, it sounds like it focuses on deficits or what's wrong rather than capabilities, gifts, the uniqueness of that individual.
Well, for two reasons. Why? Because really, for a long time, the focus of the sector was on deficiency. So that's the way that people ask questions to start with. But the other reason is kind of difficult to bring up your child's strength in a context like this. So quickly, I'm going to go to what we did so that you understand what I mean by bringing up the strength of the child. But when Sylvana and I thought together, if we had to redesign this, the parents' experience, wow, the first meeting, that's a big one. So we put special emphasis into it, and we designed we use the theory of gamification, which is very in today's world is very accepted, that there's things that you learn a lot more easier, a lot with using your creativity. So in that situation, which we called picked ability, and I'd like to credit Robin Traylor from Plum Tree for having come up with this great name. So we use a series of elements: boards, templates, cards, a whole lot of it's a complex system that involves a lot of say pictures that were chosen on the basis of our research. So they were evidence-based in that we chose photos that meant that people had used to the individualized funding to help, to assist their children achieve goals. So everything that we showed the family, we explained, look, this is a different way to plan. This is a creative, fun way to plan, other than the traditional method. We'd like to engage with you and into this situation. Some of the people went into kind of what is that? But basically, we open the session with this board, the colorful cards, and a bunch of colorful little characters, all sorts of little characters. Thomas the Engine, Sesame Street, Mickey Mouse, the things that children play with. And the first question that we ask is, choose a character that would represent your child. So they, people say this. And then the facilitator says, tell me why. Why did you choose Mickey Mouse? Well, why did you choose Thomas the Engine? Oh, my child loves Thomas the Engine because of this. So the first question brings you straight into the strength domain. And then while the person is talking, and we carry on asking those questions. And you wouldn't say, well, I chose Mickey Mouse because Mickey Mouse cannot do this and that, right?
Right.
You think about. So I use my training as a psychologist, where with the formidable amount of research that's behind what we call projective identification, on which a lot of the tests are based, personality tests. I'm not going to go into it now, but the mechanism being that I show you one stimulus, and then it brings up all sorts of things in you that would be very different to the ideas that other people seeing the same stimulus would see. So basically, what happens in this situation is that for an hour or so, the person is looking at a whole lot of things, and I could talk for 3 hours just on that. So I'm just going to be trying to be very brief. But what the situation conveys to the person is, actually, there's lots of great things that are going to happen for my child in the future. These are the things I would like to happen. So people start compiling what we call a vision board with amazing choices out there. And also, if you talk about, well, I would like my child to eat independently, you're not focusing on the fact that the child can't eat independently. You're just saying, oh, there's a picture of XYZ children eating at a table together. That's what I'd like to be, that's where I'd like my child to be in a year or two.
Right.
So this initial interview is the place where people put out not just a long-term vision, but also a short-term goals. Now, I will get back into that point later on, but I also want to tell you that we've experimented with both professionals doing this pictability session and parents doing this pictability session as facilitators. And we find a lot of very positive outcomes of having two parents sitting in a situation in pictability session and doing it together, one facilitating the other. It's so, for some people, it's very important that the person that sits in front of them, especially if that's one of the initial contact, and perhaps not the very first, but the very first where you go into a course of change. And that person in front of you knows so much of what you're feeling because they've been there. You don't need to share that much. You can just get straight in the thing, and then also they reinforce each other. So people have said, that's very important starting point.
Right.
But at the same time, we have a lot of professionals who are very curious about it, and so now we're starting to train professionals to understand what happens there, so that that can become part of what an organization would do. That would genuinely want to create change with families.
Right. It's that tacit knowledge that you were speaking to earlier.
Yeah. So that's number one. So that's our first point of difference is where we start.
Mm-hmm.
The other reason why the pictability session is different is that having chosen my own goals puts me in a different position when I then start the course of the program, because these are my goals, my child's goals. I'm committed to them because I've chosen them. Now, if you backtrack a little bit and you look at the situation of the IFSP, the Individual Family Service Plan, by law, because governments are, globally, if you think about how much money goes into the disability sector, it's billions of dollars. And they all hinge on an inverted pyramid, which is setting goals. The beginning of every plan, the beginning of every reason for a government or a service to put money into a course of action is the goals of the family. And so the governments and legislators recognize that the importance of those goals. So in many countries, they actually put legal framework around it, and they made professionals responsible legally for making sure that the voice of the parents comes through this process, that those goals are the parents' goals. But as we said before, this might not be the best situation, might not be the situation where people are most relaxed. So the situation that you come through, which is starting to be researched now, but which I hear informally all the time, is organizations telling me, well, at this individual meeting, it was really hard for families to come up with goals, or even goals that excited them, or, think about the fact that they look at the deficiency. So it's kind of hard. And so what happens is that a professional, after a session like this, a professional goes away and writes a report. The report has to fulfill certain legal specifications, etc. So the report is written in a professional jargon, professional language. So even if, when parents talked about 2 or 3 goals that they wanted to achieve, those goals become written up in a language. It takes about 2-3 weeks for the parents to get the report back. By the time they get the report back in the mail or email, it doesn't sound like anything they remember from that meeting. So 2 things. A, are we putting all these resources and all this money in in the places where we absolutely safe that these are authentic goals that families have. And the second thing is, how do we change this? So when we do Pictability, people actually write their goals in the handwriting, because they choose the photos and become really excited, and they're not going to forget about that. But also, we're committed to give them an instant little report. So that's not yet the report that you have to write for the government, but we have an iPad, and which we use technology throughout the Now and Next sessions, and with the iPad we take videos, photos. We've really tested this to the nth result and get a really, really good multimedia account of what happened during this session. And so people have, at the moment the session is finished, we literally push a button and they get this multimedia. It's a film, it's a video, which reminds them, is there to constantly remind them of, the positive frame of mind they were in, or even, the goals that they chose, that they hand wrote, etc. But also, don't forget that many times these people go through these interviews and they wanted a partner or a family member to be with them, but they couldn't because they were working or they were too far away. Now, this multimedia report, they can share right away. Very often in not with our, in Now and Next, we've made a determined effort to involve fathers or partners in the process, meaning that we have sessions at all times of days and evening and weekends, etc., and we get excellent results. We get about 23% fathers/partners to sessions, up to 50%, depending on what the session is about. But 50%, I'm really, really proud of it, and there's nowhere this kind of level of engagement in the sector. But think of think about it's been recognized. Some people say, like, it's parent. Sometimes a father is involved. I think the statistics are like 5 to 7%.
Right.
So
Yeah,
what happens is that you have because they need to be at work. They need to. Often the mothers have stopped working in order to care for a child with a disability. So the mother is now going to these important sessions, and if you get home and your husband asks you, how was the session? It's really hard to remember. And so and here's the session, here's the photos, here's the goals we talked about. So you've already got a different level of engagement.
Yeah, you bring up a really important point, Annick, around goals, and just reflecting on my experience as a coach and helping people to set their own goals. People, and this goes back to the point of agency and helping people increase their own agency or empowerment. And from my experience, people are a lot more likely to go forward and take action on that goal if they came up with it themselves versus me or someone else telling them what they should do. Right? And I'm sure that our listeners can reflect on, well, if somebody tells me what to do, how likely am I going to go do it? Or versus, if I come up with something myself and it's something I want to go do, how likely am I to go do that, right? And my bet is that people are more likely to do what they want to do versus what they're told to do.
Yeah. So there's two things here that I want to bring back regarding the theory that's backing us up. The first thing is that we unfortunately lost a really great positive psychologist called Shane Lopez, and he did research with another researcher called Snyder, and their model was goal plus pathways plus agency equals hope. So that follows, it backs up what you're saying, because having a specific direction, having pathways or strategies to achieve the results, and agency, which is the belief in myself that I can do it, that brings, that is a tremendous source of hope for people. And families who have a child with a disability are in it for the long run. It's not a sprint; it's a marathon. We need our our hope and the energy element that comes with it. So that's number one. The second thing, in terms of backup, the theoretical backup, is that Professor Martin Seligman, who spent the first 40 years of his career in the what I call the traditional model, because he developed the model for learned helplessness, which is really, to do with how do we get into situations where we, can't come out of, which has implications over depression, etc. And said that mostly the psychology development was dealing with how do we get from being, -3 to 0 maybe, or -1 in terms of functioning. When he became in the early 2000s the head of the American Psychological Association, a hugely powerful body, a professional body for psychologists, he launched positive psychology, having come from that background, and said, look, we just can't carry on looking, focusing all the time on the deficiency and the pathology. Yes, of course, there's a place for it, but that's not all what we're about. That's not what life is about. Life is about building success, thinking about the future, making plans. So positive psychology became, was launched in the early 2000s. It's backed up by an enormous amount of empirical data. And lately, Martin Seligman came up with the theory about prospection, which is looking into the future, and through this, building a better future for ourselves, and what are the elements that make this powerful. And we absolutely looked at the prospection theory when we looked at how people plan, formulate goals, and implement action to achieve their goals. So, we feel that we're backed up by an enormous amount of data and empirical results, and yet, to the best of my ability, of my knowledge, no one that I know of in the field of disability is using the positive psychology and well-being that comes with it, search for well-being that comes with it. So that brings us to my second point, which is what's different to, next to the other, similar-ish intervention, is that we have made a deliberate choice to base our intervention on very robust positive psychology theory. So that's our second differentiating point.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think we could probably do a whole podcast on positive psychology and how that's integrated within the Now and Next program. And maybe we will do that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So the third one is something you just mentioned now, and that's working on goals. So working on goals is, as I said before, it's like obviously the tenets of the disability sector. This is why they invest money. People are going to work on goals, and people are going to get results, and that's worth investing in it. And so when we when parents, as you said, define, frame, formulate, work on and achieving their goals, they become more and more empowered. We've noticed also with our approach that there's a few traps to avoid. So something came up very strongly to us, and we named it moving the goalpost. And I must confess, I recognize myself in it also. So that goes like this. I set a goal. Let's say, let's choose a simple one, but we've done that time and time again. Let's say my goal was for my child to eat independently. So if the long-term goal is independence, the short-term goal would be my child to eat at the table independently, and the even shorter goal would be, well, where do we start from? At the moment, I recognize that for the sake of bringing all the other children to school in time, etc., I do spoon feed my child, but he could feed himself, but for a host of. So we decided we're going to get him to eat by himself, and the first short-term goal is 5 spoonfuls, say. And then a little bit of, we have a strategy, and then we find out a little bit down the line that the parents said, yes, he's starting to eat by himself, but. And so we're taken aback. We listen to the but it's not there yet, but it's not enough, but messy, but etc. So, and then we just say, hold on a minute. If you had chosen that one goal, you don't back out now, because, when do you get to actually stop, celebrate, and say, yep, we've done that bit, now let's do the next bit. So if people keep moving the goalpost, that's not going to come. So that is a contributor to people in the traditional methodology, to people to give up, and become even more convinced that other people have the answers, not me, because I failed. But that's not accurate. So we don't let people going down this track, and we actually recognize this possibility, and we talk about it, and then we say to people, see if you can catch yourself or others going into that trap, because that is a known one. So we're just joking, playfully, but we go into the. But in the second part that about what I wanted to say about working on goals is that we have devised very powerful templates. Once again, I'd like to credit Robin Trelaw, who invented who set out a method which she called the 5 windows approach, which we adopted for the now next sessions. And when you look at what I need to do to achieve goals, there's a whole lot of things that I put down on paper and I review afterwards. And one of these windows is people or funding that can help achieve the goal. And that is the place where we put sometimes teachers, professionals. I can go and consult with a professional and say, how do I do this best? But ultimately, the onus is on me as a parent to get the results and to get things done. So, I'm 24/7 with my child. So that whole thing also brought about a whole rethink about what is the nature of parent-professional relationships, and that for years, it's the professionals who have been charged with the responsibility to establish a good working relationship, a partnership with families. When you think about it, it's an obvious, right, Eric? If I'm an occupational therapist or a psychologist or a social worker, of course I should establish the rapport that will bring about the best collaboration with parents. But for all the reasons that I mentioned before that are tied to the conventional approach, the deficiency, the difference between an expert and a non-expert, for all these reasons, actually, these professionals were not able. There's few and far between pockets of excellence where you see that professionals have established a slightly better rapport with families. So yes, of course, so we were really lucky that we were working with an organization in New South Wales, Plum Tree, because those professionals were genuinely wanting to see how to move forward to make those professionals partnership work better. But when I talk to all around the world to professionals who and I asked them, how would you gauge, how do you rate your partnership with families? Even when I get to places, well, there's a level of denial. There's people say, oh, it works great and everything, but unfortunately, when you scratch below the surface, and you need to ask the parents also that it doesn't always match up. But there's those people who are genuinely wanting to have these partnerships. But this happened to me, recently. I went to an organization and they said to me, we really, really want to have this professional partnership, professional parent partnership. But at the end of the day, parents are expecting us to do most of the work that will create the change. Some parents even use the word, quote unquote, fix my child. And so when I said, well, what do you mean? So they said, well, people say, yes, I am responsible for my child's change, but that, because you're the expert, you're responsible 80%. I'm responsible 20%. And this organization was telling me that there's this 80-20, the famous 80-20%, but they couldn't get away from it. And that's because, partly because as a society, we've put those professionals high up on a pedestal, and we've given them all this lovely knowledge and all this, power, if you want. And some of them are very unwilling to relinquish power. And some of them who want to are still stuck in the model because the parents are stuck in the model. So the way that we looked at this when we, as I said to you, parents very quickly said, oh, this is an 8-week program, but we don't want it to stop. No way. So basically that created a pipeline for people to say, let's have let's create a peer network. All the people who have been through Now and Next, they now speak the same language. We can carry on supporting each other. And because, we don't have to ask for permission, we can just, support each other as much as we want. So there we are, where they engage. So the parents created their first family-led conference in last April. We had almost 60 families, and we were just limited by the amount of people, the children that we could take in childcare. So for next year, we're already looking at much bigger facilities. But there was an amazing vibe. We can put a link to that movie, the little clip, for your audience to see the reactions of the parents. But one of the things that came out there is a parent-professional relationship statement. So one of the amazing benefits of engaging with parents in this way is that parents bring with them the talents, the expertise that they have outside of, the being a parent with a child. So, there's some of them bankers, financial economists, lawyers, plumbers, the whole range of people. And one example out of many examples is that Dr. Melanie Hayworth, who is a mom, said, well, I could organize a Q&A session with a panel with, talking about parent-professional relationships. And then during the conference, I will summarize everything that's said on the panel so that we can agree on a statement at the end. And that's what she did. And we'll put a link for that also for your audience. Yeah. That statement, that parent-professional relationship statement was launched by the Simon Duffy's Center for Welfare Reform in the UK. So that he offered us a global launch for it, which was an amazing opportunity. And this came about from the third point that I told you about, that is the differentiating factor with Now and Next and the others, which is how we work on goals and what is the place of every element in the situation. Yes, there is a definite place for working with professionals. Professionals need not feel any threat or anything. We haven't become OTs overnight, occupational therapists or psychologists overnight. We still very, very much need to work with the expert knowledge, but on a different level. We need to rejiggle this balance of power. We need to work. We need to work eye to eye. And the last bit of the parent professional statement, I'm going to read out to you, because instead of paraphrasing it, is have a responsibility to be the most powerful agents for change for our children. Believe in our own agency as the experts in our children, and embrace our experiences and wisdom as valued and valuable. Share our expertise with our professional partners to achieve the best outcomes for our children. Be confident leaders in professional partnerships because of the unique insight that we offer. Engage in self-education and self-knowledge so that we can continue to be active and informed leaders in our partnerships. And share our knowledge and experiences with other parents so that we can build a strong network of educated and empowered parent leaders who have confidence in their own self-worth and competency. So I could not say it any better in so few words, that this is a statement from parents to say, and this was the missing piece throughout ages, why professionals could not, with the best of intention, actually create a strong partnership with families, is because families needed to come. Families needed to step in from that mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And this is also the whole basis for the Now and Next program, forming and training. Part of our funding goes to training other peer parents. So they come to the sessions, and some of them stand out as wanting to contribute back and give back the same amazing amount of learning that they received. And so we have a process by which we decide, we screen out, what, the best possible people, and we train them. So we've already trained more than 10 peer facilitators for Now and Next, for Pictability, and we really are looking forward to expand this model. And I've just come back from a conference at the European Union, EASPD, European Association for Service Providers to the Disability Sector. There's an enormous appetite for this kind of new novel training, both in that the Pictability stuff and also the Now and Next. What do we provide for parents that's actually going to place them on a different track? And the one thing that is very, very important here is that it's not just that it's really great for parents and that's the best way to get outcome, but it's also that, and that brings me to the next point of difference, is that we need this mechanism to actually be sustainable and scalable. So we planned Now and Next. We planned it specifically to be scalable. So I've just said we're training more and more peer facilitators so they can branch out and go and training people in Finland or in France or in Canada. Why not?
Mm-hmm.
So scalable from that perspective, because every time they're going to go to carry out some Now and Next programs, they're going to then train local people and then start the whole wheel going there. But also sustainability. So it is, even though we created the model of expert and novice, and we gave all these powers to experts, and we sort of led, parents to think, well, if people are more expert than me, then they're responsible 80% for the progress of our child. It is not sustainable. There's no government that will pay ongoingly for occupational therapy or psychology or any kind of intervention. It is not sustainable. And it's happening now all around the world that people are shrinking the level of funding into the disability sector because of that. But what we're saying is, hey, you've got expertise there. You've got, the parents are a formidable source of expertise and energy. You just have to get on the right track. And we believe that with Now and Next, we created that right track, that we created a system, a mechanism that builds on people's initial belief capability, that brings people from a situation now, today, into their next situation, which is the one that they're hoping for, the one that they're planning for, the one that they aspire to. And because this program is aspirational, we just find more and more goodwill and more interest in this system, in this mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
And it's great to be able to share on the podcast.
Yeah, I love the approach that you've taken towards the whole thing, using a design thinking approach, rapid prototyping, involving the feedback from families and having families deeply ingrained within the program, that it's a learning program, that you're empowering people, giving them agency, using positive psychology, that it's scalable. I love all of it. So Annick, if listeners, whether they're families or their service providers, want to get in touch with you to either learn more or to learn about how they could bring the Now and Next program to their area of the world, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you and learn more?
Well, my email will probably be in your notes. It's Annick, Annick, at egl.ac.nz. That is probably that website, egl.ac.nz, is probably the easiest one to say verbally. That will lead to all the other websites. So we have a blog for the Now and Next alumni network that really retraces our, the steps that we've put out. And there is plumtree.org.au, which is the organization headed by Sylvana Mahmic that has incubated the Now and Next alumni network to give it a roof and give it energy and give it the support that people need to have a place to meet and a place to think together, so that to set it on its own course at some point. The Now and Next program and the Pictability set are training programs that we want to offer to people who want to make a difference with the organizations through building the capability of families. And I guess that's probably the easiest. With your notes, we'll
Perfect.
put in some more links.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Annick, and sharing your great work. And excited to continue the conversation. I think that there's a lot more that we could talk about today, but we'll save that for another episode. So thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, I'd love people to contact me with any kind of thoughts, feedback, or post on your website and carry on the discussion. It's a really good discussion.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Annick.
Cheers.
A big thank you to Annick Janson for joining me on the podcast today and sharing the work that she's so passionate about and sharing the Now and Next program. And kudos to Annick and her collaborators on the outcomes that they're generating for families. And I love the approach that they've taken to create a learning program integrating research, positive psychology, and really focusing on giving agency and empowering families. And I think it's brilliant. And I really encourage you, if you were even somewhat interested in what Annick was talking about, to reach out to her to learn more and to see what opportunities there might be to collaborate with Annick and to spread this work, or to get involved in the Now and Next project. As Annick mentioned, it's scalable, and that's her intention, to spread it across the globe. So if that's something you're interested in getting involved with, please reach out, and her contact information is on the blog. I also wanted to send a big heartfelt thank you to Annick for really helping to spread the podcast across New Zealand and also Australia. And I know that Adele out there, you know who you are when you listen to this podcast. Thanks so much to you for introducing me to Annick and her family, and for also helping to spread the podcast across New Zealand and Australia as well. So thank you so much. Next week on the podcast, we have another really exciting guest, Dawn Mayer. And Dawn is the leading, I guess, professional or expert when it comes to siblings of people that have a developmental disability or a disability. So Dawn is based on the West Coast in the United States, and he's been doing this work with siblings specifically since the mid-1980s. So he's got a lot of wisdom when it comes to this area and experience with siblings, and really deeply understands them. He's the creator of Sib Shops, which have really spread across the globe, focused on young siblings. And I have a great conversation with Dawn. So this is a continuation of the mini-series on siblings. So it's episode 2. So we'll be continuing that, working up to around 6 episodes. So excited to bring you the conversation with Dawn next week. And thank you so much for listening to the podcast today. If you like this episode and you think you know someone that would benefit, please share it with them. Be a part of the change to think differently about disability.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast. Visit us at empoweringability.org for more podcasts and resources to help you and your loved ones impacted by disability build a full and meaningful life.